The Senussi Campaign took place in North Africa, from November 1915 to February 1917, during the First World War between the British Empire, the Kingdom of Italy and the Senussi. The Senussi were a religious sect resident in Libya and Egypt, who were courted by the Ottoman Empire and the German Empire. In the summer of 1915, the Ottomans persuaded the Grand Senussi Ahmed Sharif es Senussi to raise jihad, attack British-occupied Egypt from the west and encourage insurrection in Egypt, to divert British forces from an Ottoman raid on the Suez Canal from Palestine. The Senussi crossed the Libyan-Egyptian border in November 1915 and fought a campaign along the Egyptian coast, where British Empire forces withdrew, then defeated the Senussi in several engagements, culminating in the action of Agadir and the recapture of the coast in March 1916. In the interior, the Band of Oasis campaign continued until February 1917, after which a peace was negotiated and the area became quiet for the rest of the war, except for British patrols by aircraft and armoured cars. Background: Senussi before 1906, when the Senussi became involved in resistance against the French. They had been a relatively peaceful religious sect of the Sahara Desert, opposed to fanaticism. In the Italo-Turkish War, Italian forces occupied enclaves along the Libyan coast and the Senussi resisted from the interior, maintaining generally friendly relations with the British in Egypt. In 1913 the Italians had been defeated at the action of Etangi, but in 1914 Italian reinforcements led to a revival, and by January the Senussi was in southeast Cyrenaica. The Senussi had about 10,000 men armed with modern rifles, with ammunition from a factory which produced 1,000 rounds a day. Intermittent fighting continued between the Italians in fortified towns and the Senussi ranging through the desert. The British declared war on the Ottoman Empire on 5 November, and the leadership of the Ottoman Empire encouraged the Senussi to attack Egypt from the west. The Ottomans wanted the Senussi to conduct operations against the rear of the defenders of the Suez Canal. The Ottomans had failed in previous attacks against British forces from Sinai to the east and wanted them to be distracted by attacks from the opposite direction. Ottoman Empire. In February 1915, Turkish envoys, including Nuri Bey, the half-brother of Enver Pasha, and Jafar Pasha, a Baghdadi Arab in the Ottoman army, intrigued to provoke trouble between Sayyid Ahmed Ash-Sharif, the Grand Senussi, and the British by planning a raid on Sollum on 15 June, but was thwarted. Nuri eventually gained command of Senussi military forces and began training the recruits of Aulad Ali. The Ottoman envoys negotiated an agreement with the Grand Senussi, in which his followers were to attack the British in Egypt from the west. Although his decision was not supported by every Senussi, the Ottomans provided machine guns and artillery using ships and later German submarines, to deliver weapons, equipment and money. By November 1915, the size of the British garrison in Egypt was much reduced by the expeditions to Gallipoli and Mesopotamia. The western frontier of Egypt was protected by the Egyptian Coast Guard, whose commander was responsible for maintaining good relations with the local Bedouin and the Senussi. Terrain along the Mediterranean coast is a strip of land, well enough watered to support grazing for camels and sheep. Digging for water generally succeeds, but wells and cisterns are often far apart and sometimes unexpectedly dry. The earth is dusty in summer and glutinous in the rainy season from December to March, when the days are relatively cool and the nights bitter cold. South of the coastal strip is a bare limestone plateau, about 50 miles wide at Dabar and 150 miles broad at Sollum. To the south lies the desert, with sand dunes for several hundred miles. Siwa Oasis, a Senussi stronghold, lies 160 miles south of Sollum on the edge of the Sand Sea, and to the east are a string of oases, some close enough to the Nile Valley to be in range of Senussi raiders mounted on camels. A standard gauge railway ran along the coast from Alexandria, intended to terminate at Sollum, which in 1915 had reached Dabar. from which ran a track known as the Khedive Motor Road, which was motorable in dry weather. Although when hostilities began the wet season was imminent. The western frontier of Egypt had not been defined in 1914, since negotiations with the Ottomans had been interrupted by the Italo-Turkish War and then negated by the cession of Tripoli to Italy. A notional frontier ran south from Sollum, to the east of which was an area of 200,000 square miles, all desert south of the semi-desert coastal strip, but with several oases, several quite big and supporting sizable populations, which were administered by the Egyptian government. Bedouin lived a nomadic life between the oases, traded with the inhabitants and took refuge at them when wells ran dry. Prelude. Senussi Ottoman preparations. German and Turkish officers made their headquarters at Siwa Oasis with a Senussi force of 5,000 combatants, supported by mountain guns and machine guns, to attack Sollum, Matru and El Dabar on the coast and the southern oases at Bahariya, Farafre, Dakhla and Karga. On 15 August, a British submarine commander saw people on shore near Sollum and was fired on when he went to investigate, which caused a diplomatic incident until the Senussi pretended that the party mistook the submarine for an Italian boat. Sir John Maxwell, the commander of British troops in Egypt, pretended to believe the excuse, assuming that it had been a provocation to force the Grand Senussi's hand. Soon after, the Senussi began training around Sollum with artillery and machine guns, and then Maxwell obtained documents from the Grand Senussi to Muslim leaders and journalists in Arabia and India, urging jihad. The British continued to appease the Senussi, being in negotiations with the Sheriff of Mecca and reluctant to inflame Muslim opinion. On 30 September, Snow met with the Grand Senussi and Jafar Pasha, who discussed the undisciplined nature of desert nomads, but Snow judged the Senussi forces to be potentially formidable. Soon afterwards, news arrived of another Senussi victory over the Italians near Tripoli and the capture of much weaponry and money. Senussi aggression against the British escalated in November, when German submarines torpedoed an armed steamer HMS Tara and a transport ship Marina, then handed over the crews to the Senussi at Port Suleiman in Cyrenaica. Syed Ahmed affected ignorance when the British complained and negotiations began to persuade the Grand Senussi to dismiss the Ottoman envoys for money, but German submarine raids encouraged Senussi intransigence. On 6 November, Egyptian Coast Guard boats in Sollum Bay were attacked by Edem U-35 Abbas was sunk and Nuhr El-Bar was damaged. On the night of 17 November, Senussi fired into the camp at Sollum. 2 Bedouin were murdered and the coast telegraph was cut. Next night Izawit at Sidi Barani, 48 miles east of Sollum, was occupied by 300 Mahafizia, Senussi regular troops. Syed Ahmed ordered his followers to cross the Egyptian frontier by 21 November, to execute the coastal campaign. On the night of 19-20 November, the barracks at Sollum was fired on and a coast guard was killed. Next day, a post 30 miles southeast of Sollum was attacked and civil unrest began at Alexandria when the news arrived. British preparations. The British commanders adopted a policy of avoiding reverses, before attempting to defeat the Senussi. Sollum was 280 miles from Alexandria, too far west for a base, too exposed to German submarines and lacking in fast patrol boats to guard ships in the bay. Matru was 120 miles closer to Alexandria and had a good water supply. The western frontier posts were ordered back to Matru to concentrate and to be reinforced by troops moved along the coast by trawler and on the Khedive Railway as far as Dabar, 75 miles short of Matru. Orders were given on 20 November, to form a western frontier force, made up of composite horse and infantry brigades and supporting arms. On 21 November, the 2nd Battalion, New Zealand Rifle Brigade, a company of the 15th Sikhs, parties of the Bikaner Camel Corps and an armoured train crewed by Egyptian gunners, was sent to Dabar to guard the railway and patrol to the Mofara oasis. On the night of 23–24 November, about 300 men of the 15th Sikhs left Alexandria by trawler for Matru and then to remove the garrison from Sollum, but the 100-odd Egyptians from Sollum were discovered at Matru, having sailed east on a Coast Guard ship Rashid. The garrison at Sidi Barani repulsed an attack late on the 22nd of November and retreated before dawn. Arriving at Matru on the 24th of November, Buq 100 miles west of Matru was also abandoned, although about 134 members of the Egyptian Coast Guard deserted to the Senussi with their equipment and 176 camels. After which a small force of Egyptian cavalry and infantry at Matru were sent back to the delta under suspicion. As soon as Sollum was evacuated, ships arrived full of munitions for the Senussi. By the 3rd of December, the Matru garrison had increased to 1,400 men, and by the 10th of November, the Western Frontier Force had arrived, with an artillery battery, 2 4-inch guns of the Royal Marine Artillery Heavy Battery from Alexandria and 2 Royal Flying Corps BE-2C aircraft from a flight of 14, Squadron RFC, which began operations on the 5th of December.